Global Farmer Network is all about amplifying farmers' voices, and today will be no different. Hello, I'm Delaney Howell, and today we're taking the conversation to Angus, Scotland, where we're joined by GFM member Jim Wilson. Jim, I'm so excited to have a conversation with you today. I'm just in love with Scotland, the climate, the culture, the golfing. I'm really excited to learn more about Scottish agriculture today, so thanks for joining.
You're very welcome, Delaney. Thank you for asking me.
So Jim, let's dig into it here. I would love to learn about your background. You grew up on a farm, you're currently a farmer, and you do a lot of different things in the ag space. Give us the Jim Wilson story.
Cool. So the Jim Wilson story, where do we start? Yes, I grew up on a farm. I grew up on this farm. This farm is called Hilton of Fern. Hilton of Fern is a farm in the north of Angus. Angus is, of course, a very famous area of Scotland because it's where the best beef in the world comes from. This farm is an all arable farm. We don't currently have livestock here. We're specialised in cereals. That's wheat for animal feed, oats for milling, for making porridge. That's another good Scottish staple diet. Peas to build in soil fertility, and also potatoes. Potatoes are another Angus speciality and indeed Scottish speciality, and in particular seed potatoes is what we specialise in.
So Jim, you mentioned a lot of different interesting crops that are grown there in Scotland, but Scottish agriculture as a whole, tell us about that landscape.
Scottish agriculture is challenging and can be challenging. Obviously, we're quite far north. I mean, the farm here is sitting at around about 58 degrees north, so we're well up into the northern latitudes. Scotland only has between 5 and 7% of arable land. The rest of it is hills and trees, and moorland and mountains. And the mountains aren't so much alpine as Arctic. We're much more closely aligned to northern Sweden and indeed Finland as well, where our landscapes are much more like that. So the small area that is arable land is usually clustered around the east coast of Scotland, and that's where most of the cereals are grown and the arable crops are grown. However, in those areas, the growing conditions are excellent for arable crops because we are so far north. We get a lot of daylight during the summer. We tend not to suffer from drought, although we had a bit of a drought problem in summer 22. But normally it's a very good temperate climate for growing crops in Scotland, and that was actually highlighted in that Scotland had the world record for growing wheat and barley yields for many years until the New Zealanders stole it from us, and we are now trying to claim it back.
So Jim, I think one of the other misconceptions, at least that maybe I have, is I always envision that Scotland is rainy just all the time. You don't have sunny days. How much rainfall do you guys get in a year?
It's certainly pretty rainy today, Delaney. I will say that. We in the east coast, where we are just now in Angus, we usually get a metre of rain, something like that. It's 800, 900 mils a metre. However, on the west coast, because the prevailing weather is coming from the west, it's many more times that, 4, 5, 6, 7 meters of rain, depending on where you are close to the hill. So it's pretty wet across there, yes.
So how does that present challenges or maybe even opportunities in the farming side of your business?
On the west coast, there's not so much farming. It tends to be hill farming with a few sheep and things like that. Beautiful land, beautiful countryside, great for making whiskey across there because of the history and the peat across there. On the east side, we tend, where the arable crops are, we tend to benefit from rain in the summer and tend to also benefit from the colder temperatures. So, as I say, it's quite the east coast of Scotland is really quite a temperate climate and really good for growing high quality, high yielding crops.
So Jim, you grew up on a farm, you came back to the farm. Why did you make that decision when you could have done a lot of different things in the ag space still, but you decided to come back to the family farm?
Yes. Oh, I never really left, to tell the truth, Delaney. My dad died when I was very young, and my mum ran the farm. She's a very strong, independent lady, and but she, the aim was always to come back. So, having gone away to university for a couple of years, then it was just straight back to the farm and just keep driving forward.
And Jim, we don't want to age you too much, but about what time frame was that when you did come back to the farm?
Oh, early 80s. I finished in Aberdeen University in 1981. So there we go.
You've been farming for about 40 years then.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Amazing. What kind of changes have you seen over your 40-year farming career?
Oh, it's hard. Well, I was going to say it's hard to quantify, but because when you live it, you tend not to notice the changes because they're so incremental. But of course, costs have changed, tractors have changed, yields have changed. Although I must admit, yields haven't expanded as quickly as I would have liked to have. The cropping has changed definitely. I suppose from a technical point of view, definitely the equipment has changed so dramatically. We've gone from small tractors, and I will say, even though I am obviously very old now, I never knew horses, but the people that we employed on the farm when I was a kid, they had all grown up with horses. I was never that age, but tractors were very small, two-wheel drive usually, and very underpowered compared to what we have nowadays.
Yeah, that's astonishing to picture people doing work still. And I'm sure there are still parts of the country that do work with.
Absolutely, yes. And of course, it's ironic that we're moving from small. That when I started my farming career, we were using small, usually two-wheel drive tractors, very light, very low powered. We've now moved to very large, heavy, powerful tractors. But when we come to speak about some of our work in ag tech, the tendency is to move back to those small, low-powered, lightweight tractors to save soil compaction.
I'm glad you mentioned ag tech, Jim, because you're kind of an ag tech guy, soil guy there in Scotland. Tell me about the business, Soil Essentials.
Sure. Well, I will say, before anyone else says it, I'm always a bit of a geek, I have to say that. But I've always been particularly interested in applying that to farming. And I suppose one of my themes is there's always got to be a better way of doing something, a more efficient way. I first got interested in precision agriculture because combining some of our fields are very variable, as indeed most people's are, with very variable soil types, and which lead to very variable yields over the time. And so harvesting a field with a combine harvester, you could tell that one part of the field was very high yielding, a really excellent crop. And yet literally 20, 30, 50 meters further on, it was an appalling crop. There was almost nothing there. And the annoying thing to me was that I had spent exactly the same amount of money and time and effort growing that poor yielding crop compared to the high yielding crop. There had to be a cause of that. There had to be a yield limiting factor. And that was the start of my personal route of discovery, I suppose, to trying to understand what was the cause of these low yielding patches, what the yield limiting factors were, and what if anything we can do about it. So we brought in a zero yield monitor and fitted on the combine. That would be 95, 96. It was helped by a good friend of mine, Ian Harley, I better mention, and he provided some of the kit. I fitted it onto our combine harvester, and we made some of the first yield maps in 96. By making the yield maps, then we could then say that actually that high yielding area was 10 tons per hectare. The low yielding, the poor area, 20 meters away, was probably 3 or 4 tons per hectare. Therefore, we're losing around about 70% of the potential yield. Next steps for us was then to try during the winter time to go to those low yielding areas and actually start digging holes in it and taking samples and trying to understand why those areas were low yielding. Now, some of the areas, it's farming's a very diverse and changeable industry, of course. And some of those low yielding areas you can fix. You can find the problem and you can fix it. And one of the big areas that where we could improve and fix the problem was we found that those low yielding areas were low yielding because they were being limited by low pH in the soil. So about 30–40% of those low yielding areas we had in the farm were caused by low pHs. They were very small areas, maybe 50 meters by 50 meters, maybe less, but they had just developed over time because Scotland soils are particularly acidic. Unlike England's are mainly alkaline, but Scotland has its own particular soil types, and those soil types have led to a whole different set of soil management rules and soil management sampling methods that are applicable only to Scotland. So we took these soil samples, we identified the low yielding areas, we identified the low yielding areas that were due to pH deficiencies, and then started creating maps in software to apply high rates of lime to those low pH areas to solve the problem. That completely solved the problem, and that problem has remained absent from the late 90s all the way through to current day. So that's been a huge step forward, a huge increase in yield.
I can tell you're geeking out. You're certainly in your element when you're talking about all these things, Jim. And it kind of sounds like you had a hand in helping to identify the soil makeup of Scottish soil.
Well, I suppose the nice thing about Scotland is we've got such a long history of research and development. Going back all the way. I mean, Scotland is I would like to think anyway, is known worldwide for a lot of the knowledge and the innovators. Scottish people are pretty innovative. The person who invented radar and TVs just came from not far from here, my local town. I can't claim to all that, but I would claim that I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant. So, but the tools that were becoming available in the late 90s, in the 2000s, the precision ag tools with the release of GPS, we could then start applying those tools to a much smaller area and get repeatable and go back to that area time and time again. And that allowed us to start looking at very much smaller field areas, subfield areas, and trying to work out what the problem was there. And with the advent of variable rate applications, then that just allowed us to solve those areas where we could.
Well, Jim, I feel like that's probably a good place to pause this conversation until part 2 of the series. Viewers, thank you for tuning in with us for part 1 of Jim Wilson's story. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow when part 2 airs.